Salmon don't just have to put up with predators, something that wants to eat them at every stage of their life, but there are also hazards that are out there. And by hazards, I mean things that happen in the environment that cause problems for salmon. They can fall into two categories, either a natural hazard or a human-caused hazard. So a really good example of a natural hazard that's occurred recently is the Big Bar Slide on the Fraser River. So this was located a little bit north of Lillooet and west of Clinton in a very remote part of the river. And what happened in 2019 is a huge amount of the cliff fell into the river, and it ended up blocking the water. It made a waterfall, and the salmon were not able to get past this. So it was a very, very dangerous situation for them. And since this has happened, people have been working really, really hard to clear away some of this debris, as well as to put in special fishways so that the salmon be able to get past this without having to work so hard and use all that energy that they need for spawning once they reach the spawning grounds. This is a view from the air of the Big Bar Slide. So again, the waterfall was here. Very, very difficult for salmon to get past this. When the Big Bar Slide was first noticed during the salmon run in 2019, one of the things that people tried to do to help the salmon was to actually catch them and transport them above the slide back into the river so that they would be able to continue their journey upstream. So what these folks are doing is they're using the tangle nets that I talked about in another lesson to catch the salmon, and they're quickly running these salmon into a great big bucket. And that bucket was lifted by helicopter above the slide and the salmon released back into the river. It's a very expensive thing to do, but that shows the dedication of the people doing this as well as the importance of the salmon. There are also man-made hazards and other natural hazards. So man-made hazards might include things like forestry, logging, mining, and this is a really important part of how people earn a living in BC. And we are learning more and more every year that we can do a better and better job at the way that we get trees and the way that we get things out of the ground. Natural hazards can include things like forest fires. And in recent years, we've had some very large forest fires in central British Columbia. And when a forest fire happens, that leaves a lot of soil exposed, and that soil can get washed into the rivers. And a lot of the ash left over from the fires can get washed into the rivers. So natural hazards such as forest fires are something that can be harmful to salmon and the whole ecosystem. A watershed is an area where all the lakes, rivers, streams, and ponds end up flowing downhill to lower elevations and eventually out to the ocean. Here in British Columbia, the part of BC where we live, the watershed that we live in is part of the Fraser River watershed. The Fraser is a really long river with lots and lots of streams and smaller rivers flowing into it, out into the Pacific Ocean near Vancouver. And within a watershed, there is a lot going on. So, of course, we're talking about salmon. So I have some salmon here. And looking at parts of their life cycle, I've got a salmon out here in the ocean. And out in the ocean, we know that salmon are food for orcas, killer whales. That's a nice big salmon for you, Mr. Killer Whale. Seals and sea lions eat orcas. There are boats out there, fishing boats, that would be catching the salmon. But of course, we know that after a Chinook salmon has been in the ocean for 3 to 5 years, they swim back up the Fraser River. And as they begin to swim up the river and get close to their spawning grounds, they begin to turn color. So this one is turning color. And of course, while they're on their way back to the spawning grounds, we've got many, many animals that are waiting for them, including bears. This big old bear, he's waiting for a nice salmon dinner to come swimming upstream in a few weeks. And then they get all the way up into the spawning area, And the female lays the eggs. And here we have some salmon eggs in a small, tiny stream, maybe the Horsefly River. And the eggs will stay under the gravel. And then after they hatch, they become alevins. Here's an alevan with its big yolk sac. That's a lot smaller than the ones we looked at in the earlier video. The alevins will stay under the gravel until the yolk sac is used up. And then they turn into fry. Here's our fry. And the fry stays in the river for 12 to 18 months before it eventually swims to the ocean as a smolt and ends up out at the sea before the whole life cycle starts again. And that's just the salmon in the watershed. But think of all the things that go on. There are many other animals out there, and I've just got a few of them, including squirrels, the bear, of course. We've got a moose over here. But we as people are also active in watersheds. We're a part of it, and we affect watersheds. So we might enjoy going out on camping trips with our families. Here's my little guy. He's out camping out at the edge of the ocean where the creek is coming in, maybe watching the seals and orcas, maybe even watching a sea turtle. And we also have our towns and cities that are on watersheds, and lots of activity occurs there. We have farms within the watershed. We also have logging and mining that happens in the watershed. We've got a mine up here. There's a mine truck by the moose. And of course, helicopters carrying people to the mountaintops for hiking, exploring, and other activities. So the watershed is really, really important to salmon, the other animals, and to people. And we can really affect the watershed sometimes. Now, here we've got a loaded truck. Looks like a rather interesting load on there. And this truck is just coming over to the bridge. But all of a sudden, it flips and tips over. Uh-oh, the truck is over. And the bridge is washed out now. It knocked off. We're going to pause here because there's one thing I forgot. And that's that glass of water, cup of water right there by you. So we'll have to kind of edit into this. So, oh no, the truck has tipped over and the bridge has been knocked out and the truck has dropped its load, and that load is going to fall into the river. Okay, here's my load. Good thing I made sure it wasn't too dangerous, but this is what happened. It spilled out. The load is spilled out into the river. Oh no. I wonder what the salmon are thinking about that. Okay, well, let's find out. All of a sudden, a rainstorm came along, and the rain started falling into the river and washing everything downstream. Look, it's going all the way to the ocean. I wonder what's happening with all those living things that are out there and relying on clean and healthy water. We've got to be so careful about how we take care of our watersheds. Wow.